All right, I think we can start now, if everyone's ready. If you could please turn on your cameras, that would be great. And if we're ready to go. Great. Wonderful. I'll just wait for Thilaga. All right, great. Everyone's here. Ryan, can you admit the rest of the people?
Yep, everyone's admitted.
Perfect, thank you. All right, so we can start now. Hello, everyone. And on behalf of the ILGA Asia team, I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to everyone who's joined us today. My name is Ajita Banerjie, and I'm the Senior Research and Policy Officer at ILGA Asia, and I'll be moderating today's panel. As we observe Idaho Bit today and reflect on this year's theme, which is Together Always, United in Diversity, we have with us human rights defenders from the 4 subregions of Asia to reflect on the strengths as well as the fractures within the global LGBTIQ movement in order to build a better future for all together. Giving context to and creating space for the interrogation of why these narratives of homophobia and transphobia still persist in society, as well as within the law, is crucial for the LGBTIQ movement everywhere. And we believe that working together towards a future where individuals can live freely, with dignity and without fear, requires us to come together in this sort of way to interrogate the roots of homophobia and transphobia. Through this webinar, we seek to interrogate whether or not we're truly unified as a global movement for the advancement of LGBTIQ rights. Today, we will be guided by an overarching question. What does solidarity mean for us as a global movement when LGBTIQ persons, especially in the context of Asia, continue to face criminalization, discrimination, and a denial of access to justice owing to oppressive legal and political regimes? With that, I will now introduce our panelists for today. Our first panelist today is Dr. Charbel. Charbel serves as the West Asian representative on ILGA Asia's board and is also the founder and general director of MOSAIC MENA, an organization working on legal reforms, access to specialized services, and capacity development in the MENA region. Welcome, Charbel. Our second speaker today is Rosanna. Rosanna is the founder and executive director of Equal Ground, the oldest LGBTIQ advocacy organization in Sri Lanka. Rosanna was also instrumental in filing a first case of its kind at the CEDAW, challenging discriminatory laws in Sri Lanka that criminalize adult consensual same-sex sexual relationships between women. Welcome, Rosanna. Our third speaker for today is Thilaga. Thilaga is a community organizer and researcher based in Malaysia, and their work focuses on LGBTIQ rights and human rights more broadly in the Southeast Asian context. They are a founding member of Justice for Sisters and Queer Lapis, among other LGBTIQ human rights initiatives. Welcome, Thilaga. Our fourth speaker today is Jennifer Liu. Jennifer is the director of Asia programs at Outright International. Before joining Outright, she served as the ED of Taiwan Equality Campaign, also known as Marriage Equality Coalition Taiwan, and serves as the East Asian representative on ILGA Asia's board. A very warm welcome to everyone. We will now begin the panel discussion, and for the participants, we'll be taking the questions in the end, but please feel free to use the chat box to type in your questions as we go along. So turning to the panelists today, who come from 4 different subregions of Asia. We know that Asia is a very diverse region in terms of religion, language, and culture, but also in terms of political and legal landscape that differs drastically from one subregion to another. For instance, LGBTIQ communities in East Asia or parts of South Asia may benefit from certain legal protections and access to social services, while LGBTIQ communities in West Asia and some parts of Southeast Asia continue to be criminalized under harsh punitive laws, including capital punishment for one's identity. On that note, my first question is to Charbel. Charbel, could you reflect on the crackdown on LGBTIQ activists in West Asia, be it through legal provisions such as Article 198 in Kuwait that criminalizes diverse gender expression, or the crackdown in the wake of heightened international attention in Qatar?
First, thank you for this opportunity, and hopefully one day we'll celebrate a happy Idahood in our region. Hello, everyone. Well, if you want to talk about the rise in anti-LGBTIQ activities, coincides with growing international recognition and visibility of the LGBTIQ community, especially in the West. Contrary to our expectations, actually, this increased visibility has not led to broader acceptance in our region, and I'm talking about like West Asia. Instead, it has triggered a backlash in some part of the world. Understanding this phenomenon in the West Asian context requires us to look beyond the lens of cultural or religious conservatism. A more intricate dynamic it's at play here, where LGBTIQ rights issues are manipulated strategically for political advantages. And when we say political advantages in our region, means also religious advantages and just like power dynamic that's all related to religion. And if you want me to like specifically talk about Qatar, in the conservative nation of Qatar, the plight of LGBTIQ individuals and advocates has been a tough journey due to societal norms and law enforcing body that deem same-sex relationship illegal. The recent harsh measures seems to be response to the escalating awareness of LGBTIQ matters, especially and specifically after FIFA, like after the World Cup. And the believed endangerment to deep-rooted values and customs. A mix of factors like apprehensive confusion and political agendas could be also fueling this reaction. It's worth mentioning that the severe clampdown has affected not only LGBTIQ activists in Qatar, but have also cast a wider shadow on the human rights panorama in Qatar. The repression of activism and contrary opinions, be it on sexual orientation, gender identities, migrant workers, or other subjects, is alarming and urge the global community's role in holding nations responsible for their human rights responsibilities. In sum, the harsh clampdown on LGBTIQ campaigners in Qatar particularly must increase the global focus, underscore the ongoing battle for human rights, and the necessity for addressing these issues in a balanced, culturally considerate, and cooperative manner. And since we are talking about and we mentioned the culturally considerate approach, I would like to reflect on the economic and social political crisis and the role of culture and religion affecting LGBTIQ person in West Asia. And please, if I will take a few other minutes, you can take them from me from the other question. Well, the multi-phase issue at hand include economic, social, and political factors, all underpinned by entrenched culture and religious narrative. Beginning with the economic crisis in the Middle East, especially, the nations under discussion today are grappling with severe economic instability, worsened by conflict and displacement. For LGBT individuals, these hardships are intensified. Take Lebanon, for instance, where the economic collapse and hyperinflation have disproportionately affected LGBTIQ communities. Discrimination has led to job loss for many, and the resulting economic instability has left them vulnerable to various forms of exploitation and poverty. Moving on to the social and political crisis, LGBTIQ individuals in this region, West Asia, often find themselves in the crossfire of conflict. Political instability often results in a collapse of law and order, enabling discrimination and violence against marginalized community, including LGBTIQ individuals, to occur with impunity. In Iraq, for instance, social and political turmoil stemming from years of conflict has created an environment where violence and discrimination against LGBTIQ community have become alarming routine. The emergence of extremist groups and the enforcement of their harsh interpretation of religious texts have led to increased persecution and violence against LGBTIQ community. This violence often goes unreported as victims fear retaliation from their attackers and in some cases, the very authorities that should protect them, for example. Moreover, the community faces systematic marginalization with their plight often overlooked or minimized by the larger society and political establishment. We cannot fully comprehend the challenges facing LGBTIQ individuals in this region without exploring the cultural and religion dimensions. The societies are predominantly patriarchal and conservative, with stringent norms around gender and sexuality specifically. Homophobia and transphobia are not merely prevalent, they are often institutionalized both culturally and religiously. Culture and religious narratives are frequently weaponized actually against LGBTIQ individuals. For example, in Syria, certain interpretations of Islamic law have been used to justify violence against LGBTIQ individuals. Many individuals are forced to live in secrecy or risk of persecution. This is not to blame any particular religion or culture, but rather to illustrate now interpretation that can be weaponized to perpetuate discrimination. I will give another example about Iraq, and the emergence of religious militias post-2003 has led to increased violence also against LGBTIQ individuals. These militias often justify the reaction by invoking religious texts, etc., and fostering an environment of fear and hostility. In conclusion, the crisis and conflicts in Lebanon, Iraq, and Syria, and other countries in our region that's full of war and political non-stability have had a profound impact on LGBTIQ individuals. Economic instability, social and political chaos, and the weaponized of the culture and religious narrative all contribute to hostile environment for these marginalized community. Addressing these challenges requires a nuanced understanding of the intersecting forces at play and concerted effort at every level of society, from legal reform, economic empowerment, and cultural religious dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charbel, for pointing out how religious fundamentalism and rise in authoritarian regimes have created a hostile environment where violence against LGBT persons has been normalized. Thank you for those remarks. My next question is to Rosanna in the South Asian context. So Rosanna, we've seen that in South Asia, several strides have been made in the context of legal protections for LGBTIQ persons, with decriminalization really being at the forefront of this movement. However, as we've seen in India's context and across South Asia, decriminalization does not always guarantee a violence-free environment for LGBTIQ persons. Could you reflect on some of these more indirect laws, as we say, such as cross-dressing or public nuisance laws that are routinely used to harass and arrest LGBTIQ persons?
Sure. Thanks very much, first of all, for having me here. It's nice to be involved with ILGA again after such a long time. And hello to all my colleagues and friends. Yeah, so there have been, obviously, Sri Lanka is a country that, is mired with, different layers of, thinking as well as marginalization and discrimination. So where the transgender community is concerned, it has been quite a journey for them. We have what is called the Vagrants Ordinance, which I think is prevalent in most British colonial countries. And that means that, police stop them, search them, harass them. Sometimes it leads to physical altercations. And at the end of the day, it's only like a 250 rupee fine or something like that. Yeah, it's hardly negligible why they even want to bother to do that. But there you have it. And then there's also another law. It's Penal Code Section 399, which is cheating by personation. And this is used very much by the police to incarcerate, sometimes just arbitrarily arrest and hassle transgender persons. Cheating by personation is very clear of what the criminal offense is, but the police tend to make their own interpretations of these kinds of laws. But all is not lost in that sense, because in 2022, in 2021, we filed a case against the police. Actually, we filed a case because they had invited this motivational speaker who happened to have also a police background. And she very thankfully uploaded all her videos, nasty homophobic videos on YouTube. So we were able to collect all the evidence, basically saying that, LGBTIQ persons are the ones who are, molesting kids, and they are the chief, perpetrators of child abuse. Do you want your kids to grow up LGBT, this and that and the other thing? So we filed a case against the police and this lady. And actually early this year, it has been a negotiation with the police in court, and we had a very fair judiciary. The police have said that they are, culpable, that they have been doing horrible things to people. And so in December of last year, the IGP, Inspector General of Police, actually, apologized to the LGBT community. But what's coming out of that case was the fact that the police were going to do a circular that was going to be, distributed to all police stations across the island on how to treat LGBTIQ persons. However, when the circular came out, they only mentioned transgender persons. So I don't know whether the police over here think transgender means the entire LGBTIQ community, but although we were disappointed with that, and we have now reopened the case to have them mention LGBTIQ in the circular. This circular for transgenders is very powerful. It basically prevents the police from harassing, arbitrarily arresting, asking for bribes, sexual favors. It has gone far enough to, basically explain what transgender persons are and who they are, and so on and so forth. So it's a very, very strong document. So if in fact they change the wording on the document and it includes the entire LGBTIQ community, that takes a lot of pressure off of the community here. The second very important thing is that there was a private member's bill put in Parliament last year, asking for basically amending 365 and 365A of the Penal Code, which are the two penal codes that criminalize, same-sex relationships. This April, it was handed by Gazette by the Attorney General. And what was nice to see is that rather than amending, and we all called for repeal rather than amend, because we know what happened in 1995 when they decided to amend the law and made it worse. So it was nice to see that both laws are being repealed. 365 is actually focusing on bestiality, which is fine, and 365A is being repealed completely. So, of course, once the first reading was done in Parliament, there was 14 days in which somebody could file a case. And sure enough, 3 people, filed a case saying that this law impinges on their constitutional right to basically hate the LGBTIQ community, although they didn't say that, as a constitutional right for us to uphold our religious values. Okay, fine. There was a barrage of, intervening petitions that came from people like ex-Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women, for example, and people like that, so it was something that I don't think they even expected. Anyway, the Supreme Court came back with a ruling last week, basically saying that we have every right to be decriminalized, and that there is no constitutional impingement on anybody's rights. In fact, decriminalization is part of the Constitution, is okay with the Constitution. So big victory for us on that one. But that will also mean that transgender persons also, since it's the laws are used interchangeably, especially after 1995 when the law was amended. It said any person with another person, which means that it could be trans person, it could be a straight person. But of course, we know straight people are not, harassed, bullied, discriminated against by those laws. It's only the LGBTIQ community. So it's really great news. But as you know, Parliament has to vote. So yeah, let's hope that that happens. But one other thing I would like to mention about the decriminalization process is that earlier this year, the UPR of Sri Lanka lot of the countries, came out and suggested to the Sri Lankan government that they should decriminalize. So the foreign minister who was attending the UPR actually made a statement saying Sri Lanka will decriminalize this year, but they will not legalize same-sex marriage. We're fine with that for now, because one step at a time, let's decriminalize and then maybe, go towards same-sex marriage. We'll have to ask Taiwan and maybe India for pointers on that. Yeah, so that these were also very significant. The other thing is that, there are, as you know, Sri Lanka is going through a huge economic crisis. Yeah. So the government is looking at, world bodies, world donors like IMF, ADB, World Bank. And I think in unison, all three of those big lenders, including other smaller lenders, are basically saying, get your human rights records in place. And to be quite honest, for the Sri Lankan government, decriminalization is a low-hanging fruit and they should just go for it. Yeah. So, but, they have to go through the process. So even though the president has said that the government will not oppose decriminalization, and joint opposition has said they will not oppose decriminalization, one can never tell. We are looking at, already the haters have come out and they're, sending things to the press about how we are going to be molesting all the children in Sri Lanka and that children won't be protected and so on and so forth. So the usual rhetoric, yeah. But it's hopefully it will decriminalize. The third thing I want to also mention is that our transgender friends at the National Transgender Network and others have put in a transgender bill, which will give transgenders more autonomy, more legality, legitimacy, once that is also passed. So there are things, brewing in Sri Lanka, which we hope will end up being very, very positive for our community. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rosanna. I want to say congratulations for making it so far.
Don't say it yet. Don't say it yet.
Don't want to jinx it, but we know it's been a long and complicated battle, because it's not always as simple as going to the Supreme Court and waiting for the Parliament to finally have that moment where bills can be introduced and then approved. It can take forever. So yeah, all our wishes with you.
Thank you very much. That we really need that. Yeah, because
absolutely.
I mean, the AG can sit on this. The Minister of Justice can just basically sit on this for the next 5 years and not do anything about it. Yeah, so we have to hope that, saner heads will prevail.
No, absolutely. We're kind of struggling with the same thing where the court's trying to sort of shift the burden of same-sex marriage to the Parliament in India.
That's right.
Whereas we're essentially letting the court know that this is not the Parliament's prerogative and they can, if they want, to choose to not deal with this and not look at it like a constitutional issue.
Yeah, I'm not sure that India had a saving law clause in their constitution, which we have, because our constitution was amended in 1978 to include a savings law clause, which meant any laws that were enacted before 78 cannot be challenged in a court of law. It can only be passed by Parliament. So that's the hassle that we've had all these years.
Yeah, absolutely. That's very prohibitive. No, completely. Right. But thank you so much for also reflecting on the indirect laws, such as cross-dressing and impersonation, that are also similar laws in India and the South Asian context are routinely used to harass and incarcerate trans people specifically, but also gender non-conforming and queer people broadly on the spectrum, just on the basis of how they express or the perception of what they do in terms of profession, because sex work laws are also weaponized quite routinely in India, as we've seen against trans people. Thank you so much for your comments. We will definitely get back to this in round 2 of the questions.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. We will now move to our third speaker. So my next question is for Thilaga. In the Southeast Asian context, Thilaga, could you speak to us about some of the narratives of cultural and religious fundamentalism, and broadly the sort of anti-gender and anti-human rights narratives that have come up in the region, and how they manifest socially but also legally? That would be interesting if you could reflect on that.
Right. Thanks so much, Ajita. Hi, my name is Thilaga, and I'm happy to be here. I guess happy Idaho, I guess. Idaho update. Okay. So I'm based in Malaysia, and I guess the context that we share similar context to Indonesia, where we are definitely seeing a rise of cultural and religious supremacy and fundamentalism, right? And this is manifesting definitely through what is that? Through increasing criminalization of LGBT people through different levels of different types of laws, right? At the district level, at the federal level, and at and different types of regulations as well. And this is something that is a new trend that we are seeing, so to say, like where criminalization is no longer just happening at the federal level or the state level, but also at the lower levels, right? And I think this is also probably sort of stretches the capacity of like activists on the ground, right? Because a lot of us are also probably more organized in the capital and in the urban areas. And especially for a place like Indonesia, where it is so huge. So when you have so many laws being introduced at the very district level or at the regency level, then I think it really extends their capacity, right? And it requires a lot of resources for folks to really look at strategies and really organizing folks. And I guess one example that I would like, and in both contexts in Malaysia and Indonesia, that there are some, one of the things that we are seeing, especially at the moment that I want to share, not that I'm a big Coldplay fan, but, there's Coldplay was supposed to like come to Malaysia and perform. I think they are still doing that. But, because Coldplay has, it's openly LGBT friendly, I guess, and they hold the rainbow flag and all of that. So this has become an issue. And, and there's a lot of conversations around morality and also how this is against, our cultural values and, the usual thing that, Rosanna was mentioning earlier. But what is interesting as well is the spillover effect that we are seeing because of the shared language in both Malaysia and Indonesia, right? Where like, because we share Malay language, so the kind of the anti-LGBT discourse that is happening in the region is quite interesting. So like the anti-LGBT sort of narratives about like how foreign acts should be censored or should be regulated is something that is being discussed also within the region, right? Especially in Malay-speaking context. So it's really definitely quite interesting how the cultural and religious fundamentalism sort of travel, especially when there's shared language and also shared context, right? And also like, I think, in many, and it's also in Malaysia, because of the shared language and the shared culture, we see that anti-LGBT efforts can also be easily expanded, right? In the name of religion. So for example, like conversion practices, like we see not just state actors, but also non-state actors, going from Malaysia to Indonesia to like sort of talk about like, how you need to return to the right path and making this a media fanfare and a social media fanfare, right? Similarly, we also see similar efforts by the state in sort of, expanding their LGBT rehabilitation camps to like, Malaysia, to Singapore, Indonesia, Brunei, and other parts where folks speak, where there are Muslim minority or majority populations. So again, I think we are definitely seeing a movement of ideas and anti-LGBT sentiments and efforts through the cultural and religious lens. And definitely that's definitely a trend in Southeast Asia, right? But I think also in Southeast Asia, there are pockets of, I guess, progress that we are seeing, which is also quite interesting, right? Like on one hand, you have in Thailand about marriage equality, and here in Malaysia and Indonesia, we're talking about rehabilitating LGBT people, and let's open more rehabilitation centers. So it's also quite a stark contrast within this 11 countries in the region, right? I think one last thing that I want to add is, of course, with the anti-rights and anti-gender movement, it's, the use of religion, again, the same thing that we're all familiar with, the use of religious narratives to sort of appropriate and localize the anti-gender discourse, right? Of like dismissing the notion of gender altogether, or appropriating like Quranic text to sort of justify that gender is made up, or LGBT people do not exist, or sinners, and that then leads to pathologization, criminalization, and all of that. And also, sorry, one last point that I want to add is that, for example, in the context of Malaysia and Indonesia, I guess where in Malaysia there is state religion, right? The state religion is part of state. There's no separation of state and religion. But in the context of Indonesia, where there is a separation of state and religion, but religion plays a huge, it has a huge influence on formation of policies and laws. I think here we see how these cultural and religious narratives can be easily made into laws, right? So for example, with the sexual violence law that was introduced in Indonesia as well, we see how like all of these these social media narratives that we saw about, cohabitation and like of people staying, just like queer people staying together and all of that, how those things were reflected in the sexual violence, in the new penal code, that was enacted. So I think especially in the context where the state and religion is really intertwined and there's no separation, or there's a huge influence, we see how state apparatus and state mechanisms and laws and fatwas and whatever else can be used to reinforce this misinformation, disinformation, and harmful practices, etc. I will stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Thilaga. That was really useful. Yeah, I think it was interesting that you spoke about criminalization at a lower level, or at the district level, because that's also something that Rosanna was speaking about, and it allows us to think of decriminalization in a more holistic way as well. Because often when we think of decriminalization, these sort of overarching quote unquote sodomy laws in your section 377s, a lot of these other kind of laws slip our attention, which are often actually more routinely used to arrest and crack down against activists and organizing. So that was really useful. Thank you. And I also think a very similar narratives again from South Asia and Southeast Asia on how religion and morality and the idea of a family unit and the preservation of family, etc., have been used to crack down on sexual and reproductive rights and LGBTIQ rights more broadly, and has been weaponized at the cost of constitutional rights of citizens, essentially, which has been an increasingly familiar trend across Asia, I think. So thank you for bringing that up. That was really useful. My next question is for Jennifer. I think continuing from the conversation that we've been having in terms of how notions of morality, etc., and rising authoritarian regimes across the region, could you comment on the recent closing of the Beijing LGBT Center and also other forms of crackdown on LGBTQ activists in East Asia, such as South Korea also experienced permission denials for Pride, for instance? Could you comment on these instances and also maybe reflect on what kind of international solidarity is expected or required to support this fight for equality?
Sure. Hello, everybody. I'm Jennifer. Sorry. So yeah, I think maybe most of you already heard of that Beijing LGBT Cultural Center has closed, and it was one of the longest LGBT organization with physical safe space for the community in China. And also there was a news related to Seoul Pride, which is very amazing Pride event in the region, but was forced to stop by the city government. So I see these two different situations from the different force. Of course, in China, everybody knows that authoritarian government actually control more and more, not only in the LGBT community, but also all kinds of human rights issues. So actually, LGBTI community is later than other so-called traditional human rights areas. But I personally feel very sad and worry about our LGBT activist friends over there. But at the same time, I think they are all aware of that because of the policy changed. So you need to figure out a new strategy to encounter the law and the policy, the social control situation at this moment. So some media interview me and my response was, I don't think, of course, it's a sad story, it's a sad situation, but at the same time, losing this physical target probably can provide more flexible space for the community to get away from the government's control. So, and also, but I want to highlight the anti-gender movement, use South Korea as one of the example, but because we have Candy in this room, so maybe Candy can add more of your ideas, your thoughts afterwards. But I would say South Korea probably would be the most severe situation compared with other East Asia region relate to the, we say, conservative Christian religious groups. So around 40% of population in South Korea, they are Christians. So I went to several different kinds of Pride events in Japan. Of course, in Taiwan, we organize Pride every year. And I went to China and Hong Kong and other parts of the region. But only South Korea, they have a very strong anti-LGBT group usually come along with the Pride March together. And then they have their own slogans, banners, just beside the float of the LGBT pride. So you can see the opposition power over there. They are strong. And they also work together very closely with the politicians, including their current president at this moment. So I would say this is very challenging. But at the same time, that reminds us we need to think about, probably we can use Taiwan as one of the examples that we need to think about how can we work with politicians at some point to think about how can we expand our political power in the society to impact the policy changing process now and in the future, because we see I always say respectful opposition, they use a lot of time and energy to build up the relationship with the politicians and to show their political powers to impact the policies in their countries. So even like the country like Taiwan, we only have around 5% of population, they are Christians, but they are working closely with the politicians as well. So although the very small amount of people in the society, they can impact a lot. So every country has their own unique pathway to change the policy and the whole society. But I think we share the same challenges, that how can we build up a kind of bridge between the community and the mainstream society, how can we use the similar language to talk to the people in the middle? Usually those people, they are not strongly against LGBT community, but at the same time, they lack of the knowledge about our community. Yeah, so I would say this is something everybody need to think about. Maybe we can shift our focuses from the strong opposition toward the people in the middle to think about how can we win more allies, and then how can we work together with our different parts of the ally in the society to change our society and the policy in the future. Yeah, so in Taiwan, we use some of the research methodology to figure out, okay, in Taiwan, people care about the common value is harmony, like I believe like a lot of society in this region, and also work together and then help each other. So we shift our narratives from like human rights, anti-discrimination to how can we build up like harmony society together? How can we respect different people in Taiwan? Try to get more partners, and then I think that works. So I really want to share this strategy with everybody, and we can start to think about what's or use some research methodology to understand what is the common value in our society.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I think that's really valuable to reflect on how we need to sort of learn and readjust our strategies from time to time, because often, like you said, all of our energies and attention is spent building an opposition, but probably a good idea to also divert our attention and sort of move towards building these bridges and coalitions. So I completely agree, and point very well taken for all of us who across the region are looking at different strategies to work with the state, but also different forms of policymakers and the judiciary and the media. And yeah, thank you so much for sharing that with us. We'll definitely come back to that again in round 2. I'll now go back to Charbel in the context of West Asia again. Charbel, what are your thoughts on growing trends of homonationalism and pinkwashing? And how do these politically motivated trends provide the basis for rights violations that we just spoke about, but in the context of West Asia more specifically?
Well, thank you for this topic. It's like I love to talk about this topic actually, and about the concept of homonationalism and pinkwashing. So let's introduce a little bit quickly. I promise I'll be very brief. These topics, like homonationalism, is the adoption of pro-LGBTIQ rhetoric by nationalist groups, predominantly in the West, to legitimize discriminatory policies against marginalized or othered communities. Like it's a form of exceptionalism that touts a nation's progressiveness or civility because of its embrace of LGBTIQ rights, often in contrast with other nations or culture perceived as backwards or barbaric due to their apparent lack of acceptance of LGBTIQ individuals. And about pinkwashing, I believe like most of you know about this word, but in contrast, it's a tactic where states, organizations, or corporations display their support for LGBTIQ rights to divert attention from or soften their violations of other human rights. The term has been widely used in relation to the Israeli state international public relations efforts. Critics argue that the Israeli government parades its relatively positive record of LGBTIQ rights to deflect attention from the ongoing conflict and the human rights abuses in the occupied Palestine territories. These trends have significant implications for the LGBTIQ communities in Palestine, let's say. They find themselves in a socio-political landscape where their rights are neither fully recognized nor protected. Yet, they are also used as political pawns in a larger geopolitical games. The utilization of LGBTIQ rights as a rhetorical tool to legitimize oppression or occupation is a grave breach of the principle of universality that forms the bedrock of human rights. This puts LGBTIQ activists in a challenging position where advocating for their rights can be misconstrued as aligned with foreign, often Western oppressors, between brackets. We need a nuanced understanding of the unique context within which Palestine LGBTIQ individuals and activists operate. It isn't a simple matter of progress versus tradition or East versus West. It's about acknowledging the interconnectedness of all human rights and resisting the temptation to use some rights as a smokescreen for violating others. In conclusion, the fight for LGBTIQ rights in West Asia, and particularly in Palestine, is entangled in broader political and cultural dynamics. Homonationalism and pinkwashing complicate these struggles, and violating the universality of human rights and exploiting LGBTIQ identities for political, and I emphasize on that, for political purposes. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charbel. I was just sending you a DM, but maybe I'll just say it here that you have more time in case you wanted to share.
Because I use more time in the first question, so I will.
Still have about 3 minutes in case you had any examples, any other remarks to share. Thank you so much. All right, so we'll move to Rosanna now in the context of Sri Lanka. Rosanna, you've been at the forefront of a very interesting and a very crucial engagement with the CEDAW, highlighting not just the aspect of criminalization, but its chilling effect on via discriminatory laws on activism and organizing. Could you reflect on the case very briefly and tell us about its relevance in the global context? And also, could you reflect on the fact that could this be a wake-up call for international bodies and global movements to think more critically of diverse and especially post-colonial contexts?
Sure. Okay. So, the CEDAW case was not something that just happened overnight. Obviously, it was an 8-year process, 4 years to gather all the documents and data and, cross the T's and dot the I's basically. And then we filed in 2018 and got the, amazing news last year. So it was an 8-year, long process. I think what really resonated with us here in Sri Lanka and with me is the fact that I spoke about the savings law clause earlier, that we could not decriminalize by going to a court of law. We had to depend on the good graces of the parliament. So just taking a note from Toonen versus Australia, which I believe was 1994, where Nick Toonen basically said that Australia is still criminalizing same-sex relationships and that needs to change. So, and that was, it set precedent then. And I guess the laws at the time focused mainly on male same-sex relationships. But as you know, many countries, like almost 40 odd countries, still criminalize same-sex relationships between women as well, including my country, So it was very important that we take it to CEDAW. And I can't be, arrogant enough to think that that was the sole reason why we are criminalizing or going towards criminalization or decriminalization right now. But it certainly did have, some kind of, bearing on the situation. And it did, wrap the Sri Lankan government on the knuckles quite hard. So that was followed, as I said, by the UPR. And the UPR decision, this February, where the government said that they will decriminalize. So I think it suddenly started like, a snowball or a ripple effect, basically, I think. And why is it important to use these? Because, for people like us in Sri Lanka, where we did not have any legal recourse, like going to the Supreme Court, like you guys in India have, for example, or other countries. We had to think about other ways of reminding the Sri Lankan government how important it is to treat all their citizens with respect and dignity, including the LGBTIQ community. But I also have to say that the road up to this time was also a time to basically initiate education and sensitizing to not only the public at large, but also the LGBTIQ community as well. Because in 2004, when Equal Ground started, really the LGBTIQ community was very hidden. They were afraid to even acknowledge who they were. They had misconceptions about who they were because so many people saying different things, the police after them, parents throwing them out of the house, all of these things, yeah. Everybody thinking that there's something wrong with them. So we had to like basically crack down or crack open the nut of, homophobia and internalized homophobia as well, in order to get people to come to where they are right now, where they are actually, filing cases, at court and going after, people who are saying horrible things in the media and so on and so forth. So it was those things were very necessary. And one thing I learned from ILGA, being in ILGA for so many years, is that we picked on every single small little opportunity to, lobby for a change in so many different countries and in my country as well. So, one of the major things I think we started when I was there was the ECOSOC process, yeah, and getting observer status when we were all thrown out of there because of, NAMBLA and all this other stuff. So it was a really long road trying to get, recognition as a bona fide organization fighting for LGBTIQ rights, human rights, not, anything frivolous. These are just our lives matter, and that was very difficult even at the UN level to break that, nut and crack it open and say, hey, you have to deal with this. Now we've got a special rapporteur on LGBTIQ rights, unheard of, in 2001, 2002. So it's been a long road, I think, for all of us who have been involved from that time onwards. But I think the key to this is to make sure that we grasp at every little tiny opportunity that we can get to stick our finger there and say, hey, we need to change this, or hey, we need to get observer status, or hey, we want to do this and this and this and this. And that is what has brought, I think, the LGBTIQ movement globally to where it is at right now, where some countries, a lot of countries have decriminalized. So from like 74, it's now 67. So this is, progress. We just heard that Namibia now passed a law recognizing same-sex marriages that has taken place, outside of the country. There's so many, great things happening. We're hoping that we get good news from India very soon as well. So lots of good things happening, and we're taking all of those little wins and making sure that the nasties are always on their toes, because we are coming for you. Yeah, we are going to make changes, and we will make changes. And as it says, it takes a global village to do that. So all of us here and all of the activists out there and all over the world, I mean, everybody counts and everything you do counts. So you need to basically support all of the people who are fighting on your behalf so you can stay home and be who you are, basically. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rosanna. I think that resonated with a lot of us. And you're right, it takes a global village to get to where all of us have gotten to. So thank you for that. That was really interesting. So I'll come back to Thilaga now in the context of Southeast Asia. Could you reflect very similarly to Rosanna's question on the need for regional as well as international solidarity when it comes to addressing issues of colonialism, religious fundamentalism, and rising tides of fascism in this part of the region?
Thanks so much, Ajita. I just want to say that to Rosanna, I want to stay home as well and maybe do my activism. Can I opt for that? The staying home option? Like,
Yeah, of course. I'll have your back, darling. Don't worry.
okay. Of course, I think like folks have said, I think it's critical to have regional and international solidarity in general, right? Not just on because a lot of these issues that we're talking about, like colonialism, religious fundamentalism, fascism, among others, are intertwined and interconnected, as folks have mentioned. And as what Jennifer said earlier, right? These power structures, as we know as well, they legitimize each other, and and also in doing that, suppress rights for all people, not just queer people, right? So to me, in this context, international solidarity can be a strategy, can be a feeling, can be an outcome, a necessity, or anything that you want, right? It to be, because it's such a dynamic word, I guess. And I think for me, at least, I need to root everything in queer feminist analysis, and Foucault will be very proud of me today, especially. So I feel like at the heart of the idea of like solidarity is to equalize power or consolidate power, right? And for us to just like recognize the power within, and also to recognize the power of all of us, right? And also for us to like reflect on our power, privilege, and the kind of access that we have as individuals, as a collective, as a population, and as a species as well, right? Because and if we are looking at international relations framework, I guess, and this is not just in queer feminist sort of framework, right? If you look at international relations, this is basically a balance of power. And this is something that like, a lot of countries do, in sort of trying to balance the superpower and whatever else, the emergence of new powers, right? So I think we're just pretty much applying these frameworks and these already existing models, right? In sort of like equalize power, and also to uplift and visibilize the issues that we face collectively. So I think as a strategy, I think solidarity is about, again, a lot of us have talked about the kind of risk that is involved in doing the kind of work that we do, right? So as a strategy, I feel international solidarity is also about taking, spreading, and reducing risk for all, right? Because the more people come out, the more we take back power, the less of a risk there is for like everyday people to come out and do activism, right? So people don't have to stay at home. They can like, stay at home and be online and do whatever that they want, or, So I think this is why solidarity is important, right? To break away from the isolation that oppression sort of perpetuates, right? Because in the context of oppression, we are all segregated and we are all isolated from each other. And we know this as queer people, right? How we are disconnected. So I think I think again, like going back to this, I think international solidarity again is about dismantling hierarchies, isolation, and also harmful practices. And by doing this, I think we are actually also showing that another world, reality, or whatever is possible. And I think that is important for us to do through international solidarity, right? And also, I think when we talk about global solidarity, I think most of us here are from the global south, power to the global south people. Okay, I think it's also, it's one of the common or running theme that we sort of deal with is the power dynamics issue, right? Like when it comes to like building global solidarity, I think many of us in this room have experienced unequal power dynamics when dealing with folks from the global north, lack of representation, language barriers, and so many different things. So I think in this context, of course, intersectionality is critical. And I think it's important that we sort of look at the way in which that we understand, practice our solidarity, and also engage in solidarity building efforts, right? At the same time, I also want to say that, because we are in the time of intersectionality, not to just use intersectionality as a buzzword, or to get lost in the complexity and magnitude of intersectionality as well, right? Or conveniently like hide under this banner of intersectionality, because like, yeah, of course we agree in some places these create entry points, but, sometimes overuse of this may also not necessarily be helpful, right? At the same time, I also want to say that, things like colonialism, religious fundamentalism, fascism, these are all big issues, right? Like, if I can solve this, I would be like solving poverty tomorrow, and then climate crisis the day after, and all of that. So, of course, because the magnitude of these issues are huge, so of course, it makes sense for all of us to come together, right? And like what, building on what Rosanna said, I also believe believe is such a strong word, but I guess I'm using it. I guess I also believe in the butterfly effect, where like oppression dismantled somewhere can have a ripple effect everywhere, right? And we have learned this from our experience. Like what happened in India has a ripple effect all over the context in all these 76 countries. Like, some introduction of, like, for example, the tuna versus Australia has a huge impact. A good practice introduced in Japan or in Korea or like wherever, that in Taiwan, I mean, has such a huge impact in empowering and like breaking away isolation of all people, right? So I think in that sense, I feel, of course, there's a need for this international solidarity stuff, because like, I myself have benefited from this. Like what Jennifer was saying earlier, like the knowledge sharing and the sharing of strategies is critical, right? So that we have these spaces to sort of like really think about how we want to deal with these big issues that, some of us as like under-resourced people with no savings, very difficult for us to deal with on our own, right? And also, I think when we talk about international solidarity building and also power dynamics, I think there's also a constant need for relationship building, trust building, and also knowledge building. Because I think without that, I think these unequal power dynamics will continue to exist. Okay, I shall stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was really useful. And yeah, absolutely critical to reflect on what that solidarity means in terms of risk sharing, definitely. Completely agree with that facet of international solidarity, especially for those working in increasingly criminalized contexts of not just LGBT rights, but just sort of democracy at large and human rights at large, and the kind of crackdowns that are happening in this part of the region across all 4 sub-regions, I believe, in some form of the other. And I think sharing of that risk really does sort of help us sort of do other things, like Rosanna said. Yeah, thank you so much for that. We'll reflect on that again in the Q&A session. And maybe another related thing for Rosanna would be to reflect on the international solidarity bit in terms of spaces like the Commonwealth Equality Network. And what do spaces like that hold for us in the Global South? So we can come back to that during the Q&A session, but thank you so much. We'll move on to the next question, which is for Jennifer. And this will be our last question for the panel today before moving on to the Q&A. So Jennifer, in the context of East Asia again, would you reflect on the importance of enacting anti-discrimination laws that could provide safeguards and protections not only for LGBTIQ communities, but also other minority groups? And how do you place it in the context of, as we were just speaking about, in an intersectional approach context that is quite central when we speak about unity and diversity? So if you could reflect on that, thank you.
Sure. Yeah, I think anti-discrimination law, any policy, any articles relate to anti-discrimination concept, I think is extremely important, being the safeguard for the community. And so take Taiwan as an example that I personally and a lot of experts and professionals in Taiwan, we all believe that the reason we can achieve this milestone to pass the law is because we have Gender Equity Education Act since 2004. So that provide a very simple but basic safeguard for the SOGI community in schools, and also provide inclusive curriculum for the students and the teachers, and that create fundamental changes in our younger generation. And so I think without the protection, without the legal protection, our community would become more dangerous given what's the ruling party's direction and who is going to be your political leaders that can change our life over one night. So I think law and policy protection is very basic. And then I know that is one of the reasons that Japanese community, LGBT community right now, trying to use the G7 opportunity to raise the visibility and try to push the government to sign any LGBT related political promises for the future legal protection. However, we see East Asia countries besides Taiwan, other countries till right now, they still lack of the legal protection, although the percentage of the society, the support rate actually really high, but lack of the law and policy recognition, that is no way for the whole society to support our community. People have no support system. If they want to seek for help, there's no like official system can help you. So I also think this kind of anti-discrimination law includes all minority and to remind us to think about intersectionality. This is very important to put all the like social issues together and be in solidarity, and not only for LGBT community, but also for indigenous community and the new immigration community and the older and younger community. So we see during this kind of discussion process, all the minority actually can work together and understand each other and increase the whole society to understand who we are and what we want and what's our fundamental rights. So this is extremely important, and I think under the situation like this, I really want people can show the international support. So no matter it's for Japan's G7 like Pride campaign, or if there is any like specific petition or support want from international society, we can do what we can do, because sometimes we might feel like, oh, it's just a, you know, it's a just one type of petition, probably it's like I don't do that, probably it's fine, or it's we are just a small organization in our country, I don't know what's the point I do this. But if we can collect like 100, 200, even 1,000 organization or the activists in the region, that counts. That really counts. And at least that can provide the support and sending the message to the activists who are working on this, say, hey, you got our in your bag. And I think this is the key and very crucial for the sustainability of our movement.
Thank you so much, Jennifer. I think that really rounds up the discussion really well, because when we think of being united in diversity across regional and global LGBT movements, we also must reflect on building cross-movement, solidarity across different minority groups, especially in terms of religious minorities, migrant communities that, like you said, and think through anti-discrimination laws and policies more critically. Thank you so much. I just wanted to check if Candy had any remarks from before. Candy, the floor is yours in case you had anything to add. All right. I'm not sure if Candy's still here, but yeah, if Candy's back, we're happy to offer them the floor again. Great. So we'll now open the floor for Q&A. Thank you to all the panelists for your remarks and for sharing all these very specific and crucial examples. So we have a couple of questions already in the chat box. One is for Jennifer and the other one is for Charbel. Charbel, would you like to take on the question that's directed for you, and then we can come to Jennifer?
Yeah, sure.
Sure, thank you.
Can you just highlight the question, please?
Yeah, I think I sent it on your DM. If you could chat box. Yeah, I'll just send it to you again.
I have many things on my chat box, sorry.
That's okay. I'll just send it to you again. And I'll read it out as well. So the question is, sorry, just a second. Yeah, the question is, LGBTIQ rights movement in the Middle East often faces resistance from conservative religious groups. What strategies can be used to foster dialogue and understanding between these groups and the community?
Okay. Thank you for this question. It's a hard question, to be honest, and it's not easy to advocate for LGBT equity or equality or rights in our region. But like fostering understanding and dialogue between LGBTIQ community and conservative religious faction in the Middle East calls for a nuanced approach, taking into account the region's diverse tradition and culture. Just a second.
Maybe we can use this time to pass on the floor to Mercedes Weber.
I'm back.
Oh, you're back.
Sorry.
Okay, no worries, no worries.
When you live with your mom, so okay. Well, there is like many steps we believe in, like valuing cultural norms, but we need to be like very respect the culture and religious norms in the region, etc., etc. Promoting education and empathy, to implement like educational initiative when we have the space that spotlight the struggle and the experience of the LGBTIQ community, empowering local advocacy and engaging religious discourse. It's very important to foster like conversations with open-minded religious leaders who are willing to entertain, even if it's like an underground, who are willing to entertain more inclusive interpretation of the religious scripture, but from our region, not also from other region, bring it to our region. We need to continue advocating for our legal changes non-stop, but just remember, altering deeply entrenched societal norms and beliefs is a gradual process that requires patience. Progress might be like incremental, but every like stride forward is significant. So wish us luck. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Charbel. We can pass on the floor to Mercedes Weber, who wanted to ask the question to one of the panelists. Are you still around? Yes, you can unmute yourself and ask your question now.
Thank you so much. Sorry, I'm just physically, and anyway, I already said that. First of all, thank you all for it's an honor to listen to you all. Thank you. You've helped me understand so much. You know, I'm American, and first of all, I'm so sorry for just everything my country's done. But my question was, if that's okay, because there's a, the Western imperialism and white supremacy and colonialism that's affected the whole planet. I was wondering, because a lot of countries understandably, don't, are resistant to Western influences, understandably. I was wondering, how could we how could we promote LGBT plus rights and create solidarity without being imperialist about it? Since I'm in a Western country and I don't want to push Western values just because, anyway, yeah.
Thank you so much for the question. open floor. Who would like to take this question on?
Oh, I was hoping Charbel would, is that okay?
Sure, of course. Yeah, Charbel.
Well, I was going to write something, but just, well, like advocate for your governmental people to fund our region. That would be more than enough, not to intervene, and to actually, we need to advocate for unconditional funding without any specific Western agenda when it comes to funding for LGBTIQ activists that they are suffering from a colonial laws, let's say, like in the West, in West Asia, I mean. So I think, yeah, and please, whenever like there is kind of you feel that like you want to be involved with our region, so just go back to the local activists, that the way that you are doing that, it's amazing, and just consult with them. That also would be amazing. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Does anyone else want to respond to that? Yeah, Thilaga, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a bit. I guess, like, I mean, I appreciate the apology, I guess, but also, yeah, okay, but yeah, it's a huge moment, right? When somebody says that, I don't know how to like react to that. But I think one of the things that we have seen, especially when we talk about Western imperialism and colonialism, I think a lot of this can be seen in foreign policies, right? And you know, some of it meant treaty sort of agreements, you know, like free trade agreements and things like that. It may not necessarily be explicit in the sense that the impact, but like what Charbel talked about, you know, how LGBT people are disproportionately affected by the socioeconomic situation in Lebanon, right? So I think there is sometimes when LGBT folks are already marginalized, I think, you know, some of these foreign policies that are problematic, or like free trade agreements that are problematic, can have a bigger impact on the marginalization of queer people, right? So I guess that's also one one area to look at, right? Other than funding, because I think as we see in the context of US as well, how important it is for like Americans to like, you know, stand up for Palestine, right? And that could definitely have a huge impact in the way in which foreign policy is designed in the United States, right? So I think like really looking at how domestic politics and the formulation of foreign policy, I think that would be really useful. I think that I just want to add 2 more points, I guess. I think as people working in the area of human rights, I also think that there's a Western panic, right? Like a lot of global South countries are quickly like, oh, these are all Western values, but you have no problem standing in line for like an iPhone, right? Or like standing in line for like something. So I think, again, there is the Western panic, just along with all kinds of other panics, right? The gay marriage panic, the family panic, whatever. La. So I think it's also important for us to like say, well, these are not really Western ideas, but these are universal ideas, right? And also like we can go back to the UDHR, where like these documents are not necessarily formulated by like the global north, folks from the global north, but also had a lot of participation and, you know, involvement of folks from the global south. So I think it's also important for us to like address the Western panic in the global south, and also like highlight that, you know, these are all universal values and rights and things like that. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for the
Also, oh, sorry.
Yeah,
I was just the last thing.
Yeah,
Oh,
sorry. Please.
Go ahead.
Okay, I just want to echo that Western panic, this thing, because I think we are the best evidence that we grew up here. we were born here, and we're from this region, from our own country and community. So this is not Western value, right? This is who we are, and so we always can use ourselves as the best practice to make people understand LGBT rights. Actually, the human rights is universal. It's not only from the Western countries. And following from this point, I also want to answer the question Azusa just mentioned, that when I say we can change our narrative and strategy, that doesn't mean we need to give up on human rights and anti-discrimination concept. What I was saying, and I want to thank to Azusa give me the opportunity to explain more. So what I was saying was about we can plan our strategy in a more strategic way to make sure the mainstream society or people in the middle understand what we are talking about. Because in the reality, the fact is most of people don't care about human rights. So when you talk about human rights or anti-discrimination, this kind of terminology, sometimes you push people away because they don't understand what you are saying. And of course, we can use a lot of time to educate or share or explain what it's all about. But sometimes, especially in a huge, bigger campaign, we didn't have so much time to talk to everyone. So, of course, before this kind of huge campaign, we also need to spend a lot of time to do this one-on-one or like a smaller group discussion to make sure we have more people on our side and they understand the human rights concept and what we are coming from. But when we was doing the marriage equality campaign like this is huge, and sometimes it relate to voting behavior, the action. We really didn't have enough time to explain the like what is UPR system or what is the United Nations Convention or what is human rights all about. So we need to use very quick and very easy understanding ideas to attract people's attention. But of course, those narratives should come from what we believe, which is human rights concept and the equal rights, the narratives. Yeah. So and also we need to separate two things. One is we can say the marketing strategy towards the like general public. But anything you want to talk to the politician, or sometimes it's a bill or it's a judicial court case, this kind of things. Of course, we need to stick in what we want. We never hold our ask back. So these are two different kinds of situation for me. So I hope I answer Azusa's question, and very happy to discuss more afterwards if we have time. Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you so much.
Thanks for
The one last, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Do you have another follow-up?
Just as I don't want to take too much time, so as quick as I can. Regarding the push away from Western values, again, understandably, I find it, and a lot of people I've talked to from Asia find it quite ironic, because our global understanding of marriage and gender, to the extent, like in Southeast Asia, for example, Malaysia had 5 genders before colonialism, and other countries like in Thailand, they had jewelry and makeup was seen as masculine, and then those white Christian values were pushed on people in other countries, and they've sort of just adopted it and then seen their original culture as, does that make sense? I'm sorry, maybe I got something wrong, but that's my understanding.
No worries. Thank you so much. In case there are any more thoughts and comments on that, Rosanna, did you want to comment on that? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, it is obvious, pretty obvious that all of our countries had completely different ideas about, other genders, sexual orientation, and so on and so forth, until the British came and, in our case, and in many of y'all's cases as well, forced their ideologies on us and their laws on us. And now we're still trying to climb out of that. So, I mean, governments are very quick to, lay blame on, foreign powers like the US or whatever, saying, oh, it's a foreign agenda and blah, blah, blah. But in fact, the laws are what is the foreign agenda. It is not what it was, in our countries before. So damn right, the West should take responsibility for all the crap that they have laid on our doorstep and do something about it. And if that means that they need to, fund organizations like all of y'all's organizations, then yeah, they should do that, because not only do they have problems now in their own countries, look at the UK and the US, for example, that kind of, Christian rhetoric, far-right rhetoric is spilling down and coming back to hit us again in another way, which may not be legally, but also socially now. Yeah. So yeah, not afraid of asking the US and other people, give us your money, and so we can do what we can to help all our people in our countries. Yeah, because since you all have already started the ball rolling with all these horrible laws, now give us the money so we can change it. Yeah.
100%. Thank you so much. Rosanna, if it's okay, I'll continue on that thread of our conversation. And I just wanted you to maybe reflect very quickly on spaces like the Commonwealth Equality Network, since you've been a part of it. And if you could very briefly talk to us about what kind of sort of benefit comes from international spaces such as those, in terms of also the bridge building that we were discussing.
Well, it's always good to be able to use whatever avenues you can in order to lobby for change in your country. I mean, we happen to be part of the Commonwealth. So, this whole business about forming the Commonwealth Equality Network started in, 2012 at actually the ILGA World Conference in Stockholm. But the reason why we did that is because we wanted the UK to be quite responsible for all the stuff that they have, sown far and wide over the, in the world. So, and I'm not really sure why we're still within the Commonwealth. I don't even know why they have a Commonwealth, but nevertheless, Commonwealth Equality Network was formed basically to, lobby the UK and get, funding from the FCDO. We actually managed to get an apology from the UK for bringing their laws, like the sodomy laws, to our countries in 2018 at the Commonwealth Heads of Government meeting in the UK. So these kinds of things are valuable, because I think you need to use as many avenues as you possibly can. I mean, coming from a small country like Sri Lanka, where we're an island, so if we don't depend on foreign intervention, we are like, yeah, at the mercy of all these crazy people. Yeah. So we in my mind anyway, my advocacy has always been about reaching out globally as well as within the country, because as I said, it's a global village, isn't it? All of us together. So we all exchange ideas, we exchange notes, we learn from each other. And we have to use whatever avenue we can, and also make sure that these countries who have come and put their insidious laws and values in our countries need to now, pay for that in pound sterling, US dollars, euros, whatever. Yeah, because they need to make sure that we come out of this. and we come out of it, in a good way, in a positive way, and that people in our country see, because when we're doing our work, we have polled people and their attitudes about LGBT in Sri Lanka, for example, and more than 60+% have said that they don't think that we should be criminalized, but in spite of that, the government still tends to hang on to these old colonial laws. So maybe it needs a push from the colonialists as well as others to say, hey, get rid of these laws. Yeah, we have got rid of them in our countries, now get rid of them there. And there's so many other things that come to play as well. So yeah, that's my little take on that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I agree with that 100%. I think in terms of sharing resources, knowledge sharing at the UN, like you said, simplifying the ECOSOC process and so many other processes that just are unnecessarily tedious and almost feels like gatekeeping to an extent, should really be sort of thought through, I think, when we talk about international solidarity.
In actuality, even the UN processes was so daunting, when we first started our activism. I mean, we didn't think that we could do these kinds of things that we're doing now, we were like, sort of like ostracized at the UN for such a long time as well. So, it's good that we have managed to, reclaim our spaces in the international arena, regardless of whether it's the UN or the inter-American, spaces, or, I can't remember what you call the ASEAN spaces and so on and so forth. It's good that we're in there and that we are claiming our spaces and basically telling people like, hey, listen, we live in these countries. We are from these countries. We are natives of this country, and we shouldn't feel that we are ostracized just because of who we love. Yeah. So, and of course, some of us, have European ancestry. Maybe somewhere along the line, something's happened, but, we're still born and raised in these countries. So, it's a matter of, righting the wrong, I feel.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. We are now coming to the close of the webinar. Are there any final thoughts or questions from the panelists to each other, or just any final concluding thoughts from anyone? Charbel, I can't see you, so I don't know if you had any more thoughts. Hey, all right. So we'll now come to the end of the webinar. Thank you so much on behalf of the ILGA Asia team, and we express our gratitude to the panelists for your valuable time and remarks, and also to the participants for their questions and engagement. And we hope this can serve as a call to action for all of us and the international community at large to engage in cross-movement building and work together to advance the rights of LGBT people everywhere. Thank you so much. We'll make the recording of this webinar available and share it with you all soon. Thank you so much, and we'll see you soon. Bye-bye. Have a great day.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Happy Idaho.
Thank you. Bye.